All right, so today we're going to find zeros from a quadratic graph. That's the first thing we're going to do. So when you're looking at a graph, the x-intercepts are the zeros of the function. And the zeros are the same thing as the roots or the solutions. Those are all used interchangeably. So you've got three possibilities. You might have two zeros, like this first graph. So you may recall that means that your discriminant is positive. And in this case, my zeros are the x values. So I look and see where they are on the x-axis, and it's at -1 and 3. And so if you were to plug this in, y should equal 0. So let's just try it with 3 and see what happens. So we've got y equals 3 squared minus 2 times 3 minus 3. And that's 9 minus 6 minus 3. And so sure enough, that comes out to 0. So -1 is a 0 and 3 is a 0. The same thing would happen if you plug in the -1. But I'm not going to take the time for that too. Another possibility is that you have just one 0. And that was when the discriminant was what? Equals 0, yeah. And so in this case, my 0 is just 3. When the discriminant was 0, do you guys remember what else that meant about it? It can be factored, and not only that, it is a perfect square trinomial. So, alrighty, and then the last possibility is that there are no zeros. You see how this graph is not crossing the x-axis at all? There's no zeros, so what's that mean about the discriminant? It's a negative number, right? Yeah, okay. So when you're just looking at a graph, you just see what the x-intercepts are. Those are your zeros, or your solutions, or your roots, okay? All right, next thing we're going to talk about is finding the axis of symmetry. So there's a couple steps. First, you identify your zeros. This is one way of doing it. You can identify the zeros and then average the zeros. So if I look at my graph here, I've got a 0 at 1 and a 0 at 4. So my zeros are 1 and 4. And so to average them, how do we average numbers? Add them up and divide by how many there are, right? So since there's only 2 of them, oops, just lost an earring, we're going to add them and divide by 2. So we get 5 over 2, or 2.5. And so my axis of symmetry is the vertical line x equals 2.5. So where it's 2.5, that's where my axis of symmetry would be on that graph. Any questions there? Okay. All right. Another possibility is that if you have the vertex right on the axis of symmetry, then the axis goes, when the vertex is on the x-axis, when there's only one 0, then that means the axis goes through the vertex. And that's always the case. The axis is going to go through the vertex. It's just this one, the vertex was easy to find. So here is my axis of symmetry. What's the value of x there? -1. So it's the line x equals -1. Okay, your axis of symmetry is always going to be x equal to a number because it's a vertical line. All right, so on your whiteboards, I'm going to have you guys do a couple problems. Okay, find the zeros, and then we'll find the axis of symmetry. Notice on this one, how much each line is worth. You see how this is a 6, but how many lines over is it? It's only over by 3, right? So each of those lines is worth 2. So be careful when you're figuring it out. So first show me the zeros. Okay, so do we all agree at least that the zeros are -6 and +2? Okay, now to find the axis of symmetry, it's going to be x equals a number. I need to average those two numbers. How do I average them? Add and divide by 2. Okay, so if I do -6 plus 2 over 2, I get -4 over 2, that equals -2. So my line is not just -2. That is, you can't just write that as your answer. You have to write the whole equation, x equals -2. So when it asks for the axis of symmetry, you need to make sure you write it as an equation, not just a number, okay? All right, let's do this. Oh, there's nothing there. Well, maybe I need to draw that for you. Alrighty. I'm missing my parabola. Alrighty. Find the zeros and the axis of symmetry. Make sure you don't write it as an ordered pair, though, because an ordered pair would be talking about a different one. So don't put parentheses around it, okay? All right. So my zeros are -2 and 3. Notice I am not putting parentheses around that, okay? Do not put parentheses, because if you put parentheses, that's talking about the point -2, 3 right here. Okay, so that is not what we want. No parentheses. Got it? Okay, and so then you average them. So -2 plus 3 over 2 equals 1 over 2. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 1/2. It is the vertical line at x equals 1/2. All right, next thing we're going to do is find the axis of symmetry using a formula. Okay, so we're using the formula x equals -b over 2a. Memorize this. Okay, x equals -b over 2a. So if I want to find the axis of symmetry of the graph of y equals -3x squared plus 10x plus 9. So first I need to know what a and b are. So what is a in this equation? -3. And what is b? 10. And then I just use the formula. X equals -b over 2a. So -10 over 2 times -3, which comes out to -10 over -6. Positive becomes a positive because a negative divided by a negative is positive. And then I can reduce that to x equals 5/3. Or if you prefer, you can write it x equals 1 2/3. Does that -b over 2a remind you of anything that you've learned? What's it remind you of, Austin? The quadratic equation. What's at the very front of our quadratic equation? A -b. And what's it all over? 2a. So see, the first part of your quadratic formula actually gives you the formula for your axis of symmetry. So that's just kind of cool. In a nerdy math geek way, I know. Okay, so we're going to find the axis of symmetry. This one's in your notes. Y equals x squared minus 4x minus 10. So in this case, a is 1 and b is -4. So if x equals negative b over 2a, negative of -4 over 2 times 1, that becomes a positive 4 over 2. And so x would equal 2. And again, it's a vertical line that goes through 2 on the x-axis. Okay, you guys ready to find one yourselves? All right, there's one for your whiteboards. Y equals 2x squared plus x plus 3. So first, if you want to, you can show me what a and b is before you use the formula. Or you can just use the formula, I don't care. Your b is incorrect. All right, so when you plugged it in, you had -1 over 2 times 2, and so your axis of symmetry is x equals -1/4. All right, this next one is in your notes. All right, so I've got y equals x squared minus 3. Now, remember, standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. What am I missing from this? I'm missing the bx, aren't I? So in this case, a is equal to 1 and b must be equal to 0 since it went away. So when I plug it in, x equals negative b over 2a, -0 over 2 times 1. And 0 divided by anything is still 0. So it's x equals 0. What that means is that your y-axis is actually the axis of symmetry. Because the line x equals 0 just goes right on top of the y-axis. Okay? Alrighty, here's one for your whiteboards. Alright, so when you plugged it in, you guys should have gotten x equals -2. Because -12 divided by 6 is only 2. All right. Now the last thing we're going to do is start talking about finding the vertex. We've already done the first part of what we have to do. We're just going to add on to that. All right, so to find the vertex of a parabola, the first thing you're going to do is find the axis of symmetry. And that's going to actually give you the x value of the vertex. So if I have y equals -x squared minus 2x, what does my a equal in this case? -1, and b is -2, and there's no c, so c is 0, right? But we're not going to worry about that right now. All right, so x equals -b over 2a, so negative of -2 over 2 times -1, and so that becomes a positive 2 over a -2, and so x equals -1 is my axis of symmetry. So that is my x value also for the vertex, because the axis of symmetry goes through the vertex. So now I'm just going to plug x into my equation. So I've got y equals -x squared, so negative of -1 squared minus 2 times -1. So that comes out to -1 plus 2, and so my y value also comes out to 1. And so you just write the ordered pair. It's, in this case, -1, 1, and that would be the vertex of your parabola. Okay, so obviously you guys don't have to write the words when you do the problem, so these will actually go a lot quicker, but I just wanted to make sure all the steps were clear for you guys. So let's do another one without all the steps on it, written down anyway. Okay, so we're going to find the vertex of y equals 5x squared minus 10x plus 3. So what is my a? Here's a, and here is b, right? Okay, so x equals -b over 2a. So negative of -10 over 2 times 5. That becomes a positive 10 over positive 10. So x equals 1. Then I'm going to take that 1 and I'm going to plug it in to this equation. So y is going to equal 5 times 1 squared minus 10 times 1 plus 3. So that becomes 5 minus 10 plus 3, which is negative 5 plus 3. And so that equals negative 2. So my vertex is going to be at 1, negative 2. Any questions? All right, you guys get to do one on your whiteboards then. If you want to first show me your x value before you go on, you can do that. Okay, so when you plugged it into negative b over 2a, you should have gotten that x was equal to 2. And then you plug that 2 into the equation, y is negative 14, and so the vertex is at 2, negative 14. Okay, got one more for you guys on your whiteboards. Again, if you want to show me your x value first before you go on, go right ahead. All right, so when you plugged it in, you should have gotten that x was equal to negative 4. You plug the negative 4 into the equation, and y is 5, so your vertex is negative 4, negative 5. Okay, that concludes this lesson.